Hi guys, and welcome to Soundsphere Magazine. In recent months, myself and Dom have been playing through Broken Sword, which you can see on the channel. We've had a lot of fun. It's been a really great game, but we are still only a couple of episodes in, and we do need to finish it. But in the meantime, I did manage to sit down with Tony Warriner, one of the co-founders of Revolution Software, who created Broken Sword, and we spoke about his career in game development, games from Lure the Temptress, Beneath the Steel Sky, Broken Sword, In Cold Blood, and also about his new book, which has just launched on Kickstarter. It's called Revolution: The Quest for Game Development Greatness. Link is below. Enjoy the interview. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Hi, Tony. How are you doing?
Hey, not bad. And you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. So, first things first, I wanted to ask you about how you started off in games development, because it's quite an interesting story, if I remember correctly.
Games dev. Well, you mean right back to the beginning?
Yeah, right at the beginning.
Well, I mean, I guess I was like 12 or something in 1980. So like 1981 or so, we started to see the first like home computers, and no one knew what they were. They were just these things that started popping up on adverts and stuff. Like the really big one in the UK was the ZX81, and I was kind of, that looks interesting, but I don't really know what it is, so I'll kind of watch it a little bit and see what happens. But a few of my mates got them, and it was just like this little tiny black plastic thing with a keyboard on it that plugged into your telly, and most people were playing games, but you could program it as well, and that I instantly realized that opened up like a whole new world, so I kind of, at that point, I just obsessed with these things, and so did my paper round and saved up for one, got a computer, and just kept going with it and programming harder and harder stuff, playing the games but also writing them. I did a few and got better and better at it. Failed all my exams because I was too busy on the computers, but I didn't care about that, because I figured, I mean, this was like, imagine now we're in 1985, 86, something like that. I mean, that was the middle of Maggie's Millions and all that stuff. If you remember all that, Gives a Job and all that kind of, it was a nightmare, really. It was like grim. And the joke was that no one was going to get a job, and the schools were like laughing at us, because they were, if you weren't like going to get 50 A levels, then you were screwed, and they were kind of mocking people, the schools. It was just grim all around. But I was like, hey, I don't need any of this. I'm just going to write games, So I wrote a game instead, a game called Obsidian, and sent it off and got it published. And I was straight in, So I kind of got away with it.
Am I right in saying that Obsidian was published before you left school?
No, it was published in, I don't actually know, when was it published? I think it was published like late 85, something like that. So I would have left, my exams were earlier that year, for what it's worth. So it was like the last year of school, so I was already out by then.
Right, fair enough. And how did you go from publishing Obsidian to eventually forming Revolution with Charles and Co?
Well, it's quite, obviously it was Charles that I met at Arctic who published Obsidian. So, Charles was my first boss, I suppose, in the games industry. And Arctic was on its way down because there was big changes going on in the games industry. It was kind of changing from one thing to another, and lots of big American companies were moving in, and the kind of hobbyist business side of it that had sprung up pretty quickly got wiped out, and not many of them survived. But the scene itself continued, but it just became a much bigger business. So a lot of those little companies like Arctic didn't survive. But we all went off and did a company called Paragon, and we were doing conversions of American games for principally a company called US Gold, who were huge at the time in the UK. Because what you had in America, you had the Commodore 64 and the like Atari computers and things like that, and they weren't quite as big over here. And we had like the Sinclair machines, the Z80 based machines, which were not in America at all. So the idea was they would license a Commodore 64 game or an Atari game from America, and then pay someone to port it over to the 8-bit machine, the Z80 based machines. So we did that for a year or so. And Charles went off to work for US Gold. We were too successful. They gave him a job, and he went from that. He went to Activision, where he learned all about adventure games from Sierra, because they were handling the European distribution of Sierra titles, so they knew exactly what those games were doing in the market. You know, they had the financials and they saw they were doing quite well, and there was a market there for adventures still. So, and Charles had written adventures at Arctic as well, so he was into that whole narrative thing. I, meanwhile, was doing stuff for Codemasters and that kind of thing, budget games and stuff. And then eventually Charles said, hey, let's do our own thing. Let's write adventures, you know. So we all got together like 1990, and that was the start of Revolution.
And your first game with Revolution was Lure of the Temptress.
Lure, yeah.
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 How did that come about? Who came up with the story for it and the idea for it?
It was kind of random. I mean, we were very chaotic. I mean, we just did what we wanted, really. I mean, we wrote this engine that was going to do things that other games couldn't. So we you know, our big idea was to have characters walking around the whole world. Virtual fields, we called it, and we thought we could make a great adventure game out of that. So that was our tech angle. We kind of thought, well, where did the game design come in? It's a good question. I mean, we just kind of drew some graphics, and we thought prison cell looked quite good. A dungeon prison cell at the beginning looked quite good, and it kind of just flowed out from that, you know, into a whole game. And it was nearly finished, and then the publisher said, you know, how about we call it Lure the Temptress? And we said that there ain't no Temptress, so that's a bit of a problem. And they said, don't worry about that. Here's 6 months more money. Do an extra bit on the end and put a Temptress in. So that's what we did. That's basically the story. I mean, there was also a lot of drama with publishers in the middle, because our initial publisher was Mirrorsoft, which was Robert Maxwell. Mirror Group newspapers who fell off his boat in the Mediterranean, and that caused the collapse of Mirror Group. So we kind of swapped publishers in the middle of it all. And that was a bit of drama as well, but just part of the fun in the games industry.
Going back to the engine that you developed, like one of my earliest memories of playing on the Atari ST was flitting between Lure of the Temptress and Monkey Island.
Right.
And one of the things I loved about Lure of the Temptress was that if you wanted to speak to somebody, you'd have to go and find them, and you could be talking to somebody or just wandering around on one screen, and some of the characters you need to talk to just sort of just wander past. And
yeah,
you know, pardon the pun, but it was very revolutionary at the time. You know, and it still kind of is. You know, a lot of games don't do that still. Adventure games certainly don't really do that. You know, who came up with the idea to do that?
Well, we initially played. I think it was Leisure Suit Larry, and we just looked for an angle, something different, and we realized that all of those games were just like, here's the location you're on. You know, that's the location, and that's where things happen, and the rest of the world is effectively switched out. You know, there's nothing happening anywhere else. So it's just our idea. Just what can we bring that does something more interesting? And I think also we played. I mean, I was a big admirer of a company called Gargoyle Games, who wrote a game called Dunderak and another one called Marsport. And they were very much based on a kind of city that lives, and you could walk around everywhere along a scrolling map and stuff. I mean, they look quite crude now, but they were revolutionary back in the 8-bit days, you know. So I guess there was a little bit of Gargoyle Games in there as well. When we sat thinking, what can we do, you know? I mean, going forward a bit from there, we actually had problems designing adventure content using that technology, unfortunately. So I mean, we did it big time in Lure of the Temptress. We did it kind of a bit in Steel Sky, and then by Broken Sword, we kind of said we just can't really make it work in an interesting way, because I mean the failing of it is that stuff's happening off screen. Well, that sounds good, but the problem is it's happening off screen, so you don't see it.
Yeah,
I mean,
did
the
like
funny
how.
thing is,
Go on.
the funny thing is that I was looking at Lua recently, and Lua doesn't cheat. I mean, it really is the whole world working at once, and we used to put windows in walls so that you could look through and see the characters in the other room to prove that it was working, But I realized recently that we could have just faked the whole thing, and it would have been actually easier. It would have been so easy to fake it. I mean, it's really doing it. The whole map is live. The characters really are walking about, but it would have been much simpler just to pretend. We were too honest.
I don't think anyone would have noticed either.
Yeah, they wouldn't. They wouldn't. I mean, it might have even been better in a way because you could have you'd have had more control over the faking. It'd have been more orchestrated in a way. But there you go.
So, to sidetrack a little bit, in the opening sort of 10 minutes of Broken Sword, you do have Nico wandering around the screen a bit, taking pictures. Is that based on the same technology then?
No.
No, is that something different?
That's the faking it. You can't tell, can you?
No, you can't.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, Broken Sword doesn't really pretend to do that stuff, in truth.
Right. So after Lure of the Temptress launches, you then do Beneath the Steel Sky.
Yes.
Yeah, which is huge. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember how big it. But when I was into adventure games in the 90s, I admit I skipped over Beneath the Steel Sky initially. I played Lure of the Temptress, and then I played Broken Sword. And then Beneath the Steel Sky I discovered after. I was the same with Monkey Island as well. I played Monkey Island 1 and 3 independently of each other, not realizing they were connected, and I skipped 2. So
right,
I'm a bit weird. So
always skip number 2.
Yeah. What was Beneath the Steel Sky like to work on, and as a because you went from fantasy to sort of sci-fi.
That was our big theory of how to do it. You do a dungeon game, then you do a sci-fi game. Then when you've had enough of that, you switch back to dungeons, and then when you're sick of dungeons, you switch back to. So like, I mean, a lot of people do that, to be honest, don't they? I mean, if you look at Netflix, it's basically dungeons or sci-fi, isn't it? Half of it.
BioWare, it's Dragon Age and Mass Effect, isn't it?
Yeah. You got magic, and you got future technology. They're kind of the same thing, aren't they?
Yeah.
So that's all we did. I mean, we just we had this. I think Charles probably had this idea of future cities in the Australian desert, and he kind of said, we were trying to design it and not getting anywhere. So he kind of said to me and Dave Cummins, the writer we had at the time, he sent us off to Wales to design the game. And he said we went on a Friday, and he said, come back next week on Monday with a game design, So we went, and we basically messed about for 3 days, and then we said, oh dear, it's we haven't got a game design, we have to go back. So we basically panicked and sat at the table and grafted out the design for Beneath the Steel Sky. And it, I was reading the documents recently, and that we actually wrote on paper back in whenever it was, 91 or something, and it's pretty good. I mean, most of it what we did that weekend actually came through. It's actually in the game, a lot of it. So there you go. That's how we designed that game. We just we ran out of time, panicked, just started typing.
So does Charles know that?
He will do if he's actually read my book about it, so he should know now. He hasn't said anything, but that's what we did. Yeah.
Fair enough. So
yeah, he probably thought we were sat there diligently working all weekend. That wasn't how it worked.
Was there alcohol involved?
Yeah, it probably was. Yeah, probably was. Yeah.
So then, 1996, Broken Sword comes out.
That one did all right, yeah.
So how did the concept for Broken Sword come about?
The concept for that came, Charles was talking about an obsession of his, which is Egyptian hieroglyphics. He still wants to do a game, based on Egyptian stuff, pyramids, and getting the hieroglyphics and then figuring out what they say and learning some mystery from that, and that gives you a clue what you should do and stuff. I mean, he's still talking about this. Even last year there was a design floating around for it. So he had a dinner in London with Sean Brennan, who was marketing manager at Virgin Interactive, who'd really backed us on Steel Sky. And Sean had read a book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which is quite a famous book now. And it's basically a bunch of sort of pop history about the Templars. I mean, they made a lot of claims about the Templars and the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant, and the fact that these things are still around and people are actively involved in it. I mean, it's all kind of not necessarily all that true, but they were sort of very serious about it. And that's that book anyway, and it's very famous now.
It's what inspired Da Vinci Code, if I remember correctly, as well, isn't it?
Well, they sued Dan Brown for taking all their ideas and putting them into Da Vinci Code. But I mean, this is a well-told story now. But I mean, we actually don't believe that. We think Dan Brown played Broken Sword.
I personally think it did as well,
because it's closer to what we talked about in Broken Sword than it is the slightly more difficult Holy Blood, Holy Grail book. I mean, Charles read that one. Also, Foucault's Pendium by Umberto Eco. That was another book that was read at the time. So that's part of it as well. And I think that's about the Templars. I've not read it, but I think Charles read it. So those two books were the main inspiration that Charles read and Sean had read as well. And we from that, I mean, we didn't take much from Holy Blood because even for us it was too outlandish, but we thought the Templars were a pretty interesting concept. And this idea of something from ancient history still being around and operating, it's quite a compelling concept, isn't it? I think. So I mean, that's basically what we did with Broken Sword. Dan Brown, he almost certainly played Broken Sword. The Holy Blood people saw his book and said, "All right, that's our ideas. We're gonna sue for it." And we kept quiet.
So I personally think that Dan Brown must have played Broken Sword. I mean, he must have done, because it's too similar, isn't it?
To be fair, he may not have played it, but if you read, I mean, I think Da Vinci Code is actually a great book, badly written. I know the intellectual people criticize it for being badly written, and it is badly written. It feels as if it wasn't edited properly, but the actual story is very good, and the concepts are very strong. Now some of it looks like it's come from Wikipedia. He's kind of gone, Priory of Sion, what's that? Typed it into Google, read the Wikipedia page and gone, I can use that. So he probably, when he was doing all that, if that's how he did it, and I'm just speculating, of course, if that's how he did it, then he probably came across Broken Sword in his Googling. So maybe, he maybe looked at it from that angle rather than going to the game shop and buying it and playing it and thinking, I'll write a book about this. He's probably a bit more one step removed from that, but I'm sure Broken Sword factored into what he saw when he was researching Da Vinci Code.
I mean, when I first read, sorry, say again.
I would think something like that,
Yeah, when I first read Da Vinci Code, I felt like I was reading a Broken Sword novel. To me, it just is that it's just Broken Sword, but with different characters.
It's close, isn't it?
Yeah. It's very. I mean, you've got the male lead and your female co-lead, and then you've got the adventures and deciphering things and hidden secrets and secret groups and all. It's just the same thing, I think.
And the Khan character. We have Khan. He has the whatever he's called.
Yeah,
begins with S.
Yeah,
This something.
So about Broken Sword then. By that point, you were the lead developer anyway, but you were getting quite like really senior and doing a lot in the game, if that makes sense. Is that right?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I was joint lead or something like that. I mean, I didn't do the platforms type stuff. I didn't do like, someone, when you program in games, someone has to deal with the actual computers, like how to deal with Windows or how to deal with the PlayStation. I didn't do that bit. I did the bit that the game was written in. So we had like a scripting language that you use to make the conversations and stuff. So I used to do that side of things, and maybe the UI as well. So I was like top end of things, and other people were doing low level stuff. I mean, there were probably 4 programmers on Broken Sword, so it was getting bigger at that point. But compared to the games these days, it's still pretty small. I mean, the whole thing was like, I think when it ended, there was probably 40 people in the office by the time it finished. When
you were creating Broken Sword, how much input did you have with the puzzles?
I eventually, I mean, I was there at the beginning of the designing, but then I got pretty rapidly sidetracked with the business of actually stitching it all together. So I was more a factor on the design of Lure and Steel Sky, specifically or especially Steel Sky. Broken Sword, I was there at the beginning of the design side, but then it just got so big, I was like pulled off into programming, and that's what I did. So I wasn't. I mean, I was basically at that point, I'd go to a few design meetings and I'd go, that's not going to work, or that's a good idea, that kind of thing. And then I'd go back to programming, and other people would go back to the design. And sometimes I'd get like design stuff through to implement into the actual game, and I'd look at it and go, this doesn't work, and send it back, that kind of thing. Or how about this being a better idea? So I was kind of on the edge of the design, but I wasn't like sat in the design team specifically instructing what we were going to do. There was too much to do at that point. There was too many people, and we were, when you've got a 4 or 6 person company, everybody does a bit of everything. When you got a 30 odd people person company, you tend to get a specific role, and it's difficult to be more general. So, Broken Sword, I'd say I was programmer, as much as anything.
So if anything, it was more like a step back into focusing on, like, your specific area.
Yeah, I mean, we had what was called the fog, and the fog was the wall of fog that sat between the design team and the rest of us, and you never knew what was happening behind the fog, because it was foggy and you couldn't see through it. And once in a while, like a bit of design would come out, and you'd go, "Ooh, thanks for that. We'll make that work in the game," So everybody was on one side or the other of the fog. And the fog, the master of fog was Charles, of course.
So ultimately, the goat wasn't you then.
The goat was not me. No. No. I never saw the goat. In fact, I didn't stitch that one together. I mean, if I had, I might have said, hang on, this is a bit difficult, isn't it? But that one just slipped through. I mean, it was meant to be difficult. Charles was deliberately trying to slow people down, but I think he kind of overplayed it slightly. I believe people found it quite difficult. Is that true, Graham?
So I've heard. I think that's probably the only adventure game puzzle I can think of that's got its own Wikipedia entry.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the publisher for Broken Sword was Virgin. What was working with them like? I mean, I think Virgin had published all the games up until that point, but with Broken Sword,
right, yeah.
Different.
Well, I mean, in those days they were very good. They were like a quite a small dynamic team, and they were like going for it. They were quite brave and bold in what they would do, and they wouldn't do anything by halves. So I mean, their thing with Broken Sword was, let's chuck a load of money at an adventure game and do the best one ever. And see what happens commercially. I mean, they were very commercial, but they were also bullish. They weren't conservative. They didn't go, let's be, they never said steady on, let's be careful with this. They were all like, go for it, do the best thing ever. So we made this comparatively big game, and it had lush music all the way through it, and it had 12,000 lines of dialogue in it. You could click on anything and get a response, and it had really smooth animation because we just drew as much as we needed, And then we had the layouts were done by Don Bluth artists in Ireland, and the music was done by Barry, who was a top TV Morse type guy, So, everybody was good. Everything was good. Everything was done properly. So, I mean, at that point, you can credit Virgin and Sean Brennan specifically with that outcome. I mean, later on, they started to get dragged down by their US parent. And it all turned quite the opposite. Even by the time we did Broken Sword 2, that whole relationship was going wrong. But that's what happens. If you get one good game out of a publisher, and then you wait for something to go wrong. It always goes wrong with publishers, so we shouldn't be surprised by that. But that's kind of what happened. It always goes wrong.
So, going on to Broken Sword 2 then. Broken Sword 1 had a big budget for a game of its type. Broken Sword 2 had a smaller budget, I believe.
Yes, probably half as much.
Right. So was Broken Sword 2 more of a challenge then, if you had to try and keep to the same aesthetics but do it cheaper?
It was more of a disappointment in so much as their attitude had already started to change, and new people were coming into Virgin, and they were saying, this is before, obviously these things run ahead, so nobody knew what the success of Broken Sword would be. So they were looking at what we would do next before Broken Sword 1 hit the market, and they were kind of saying, you had a bunch of guys who were obsessed with Resident Evil, I think, and they were looking at Broken Sword and saying, "What is this? Why have we spent all this money on this? How are we gonna get it back?" And eventually, they decided the way they were going to get their money back from Broken Sword, which some of these people were assuming was effectively lost because it had cost, not as much as most games, but still quite a lot for an adventure game. They were like, okay, we'll just get a sequel out of it as cheaply and quickly as possible. So there was basically a year, and instead of 2 years, and like half the money. The funny thing was, because we reused the engine and we had the world already worked out, the whole thing, it was actually pretty easy compared to anything else we'd done. So we actually did do it on time, and it's the only game I've ever worked on that's come out on time, been finished on time. To the day, it was done on time.
Oh, wow. So, Broken Sword 2, like from a fan perspective, it's got a lot more like Easter eggs and humor and stuff in it. Right. Would you agree with that?
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe. I mean, there are a few Easter eggs in it, yeah. I mean, especially I always remember the one I did, of course, the spider one.
Yeah.
As I say, we finished on time. We finished half a day early, so that's where on that spare half day I did the spider Easter egg.
That me and Dom are playing through very slowly, but we are playing through Broken Sword for the magazine's channel, don't you?
Yeah.
I think when we eventually get to Broken Sword 2, I'm gonna have to make him sit through that bit. Because normally you wouldn't discover it unless you purposefully sat and waited, but
you do have to wait, don't you? And we tried to get it recently, and we had to look it up how to do it.
I think you've just got to wait a few minutes.
I think you have to stamp on the spider twice or something like that, and then you sit and wait for. Yeah, I think you've got to stamp the spider at least once, and then you sit and wait. But it's quite a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time I discovered it was by accident, and I think my mum called me to do something, so I didn't pause it. I just left it and I went away, and then I came back and I was like, "What?
George is dead."
Yeah, so I had to go back and work out what had happened. Because I think it's part of the nature of an adventure game. People do try doing different things, combining different inventory items or examining different things, or experimenting to see what happens. And if you find out that you can die by just being sat there, then you've got to work out how you do it, and that's what I did. But I've not seen it properly. I've not played it and done that properly in a very long time. I've seen it on YouTube like since then, but yeah, I'll have to do that. So obviously that was your baby.
That was my one, yeah. Yeah. Very, very foolish thing to try and do on the last afternoon of a game's development, because I mean it's on the very first screen. So if I'd introduced a bug or something, I'd have been utterly screwed for it, you know. proper bollocking, because I would have broken the whole game.
But I mean, managing to do that in the first, it went in half a day. That was quite impressive, really.
Well, it was easy enough. It was just a bit of script, and a guy called Mike Ryan drew the spider jumping animation, and that was it, really. It wasn't too difficult. But yeah, but that's about the rate. You know, you could do that amount of content 2-3 hours. That's the kind of speed that these things come together.
Fair enough. While we're speaking of Broken Sword 2, I know the answer to this, but can you officially confirm on camera to the world whether Emily's dead or not?
Emily dead? What gives you that idea? She's absolutely dead, yeah. Emily is a ghost.
Yeah, I mean, I assume everyone that's watching this will have played the game, but if you watch very carefully, like what gave it away for me was that when she turns, she doesn't turn like a person. She sort of disappears and then just appears facing the other way, and there's like the sprites change, and you know you can tell it's purposefully designed like that.
It couldn't be clearer, really. And it's in the story, of course. You know, Rio was playing hide and seek, and this thing happened where she got trapped in the chest. So it's all there.
I do think it's interesting when people who've been playing the game for years realize after so many years that the whole time Emily was dead, and then when they go back and with that knowledge, they go back and play it again, and they'll look for clues, and it is quite plain that she's a ghost.
But also, a lot of people say they get a real like chill down the spine when they realise, because they were speaking to her and they thought she was alive, and then when they realise she's dead, they're going to get a shiver. You know, imagine that from a video game. It's astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is quite spooky as well. You know, especially when you do go back and you pick up on the way the sprites fade into each other, and and then like the dialogue of her being quite clearly dead, and that like the ants talking about her, and it's just it's so obvious, but when you don't realize it and then go back, it must be really chilling, especially when people have been playing it for years and then only notice what year are we, 15 years later or whatever. I
think it's more, isn't it? It's 20. It'll be 20. When did it come out? 97.
97, yeah.
So 2017 would have been 20 years, wouldn't it? So
25 years.
It's 25 years, isn't it?
Wow, scary.
Blimey.
I feel old.
Yeah, well, it wasn't very long ago that Broken Sword 1 was 25, so it can't be far off, can it?
Yeah, well, it's 1997, so it will be 25 years this year. Broken Sword 1 was 25 years last year.
Yeah. So
then after Broken Sword 2, you went on to do In Cold Blood, which was meant to be, it was a PlayStation exclusive, but it came out on the PC as well, didn't it? If I remember right.
It did come out on the PC, yeah.
So how did that come out?
Primarily, it was a Sony game.
Yeah. I remember... yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I remember it being advertised for the PlayStation, and then I chanced upon it for the PC. So but I didn't even realize it was the same company as Broken Sword. It was just, it was just a game.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing was that Broken Sword did extremely well on the PlayStation. It wasn't ported particularly well, but it did very well, and it was voted by PlayStation magazine readers like top whatever it was, top 10 game of the year and all this kind of thing. It did surprisingly well on console. No one said it would do, but it just sold, from word of mouth and stuff. So I mean, after Virgin Interactive went down, we were kind of, where should we go next? And the logical thing was to go and talk to Sony, because they'd obviously also done extremely well out of Broken Sword. But they were like, oh well, let's not do Broken Sword, let's do something more PlayStation-y. So basically give the guy a gun and let's have a bit more action. And we were like, oh, well, we like to do our stories and adventure puzzles and narrative and stuff, because that's our thing. And they said, yeah, so do that, and they give the guy a gun and mix the two and see what happens, And In Cold Blood is what came of it. But they didn't care. Sony didn't care about PC versions, so they gave us the rights. So we did a PC version anyway, because we did develop both in tandem, So we sold, I think it was Ubisoft. We sold the rights for the PC version, and it kind of helped with the funding, So made perfect sense.
What was the experience like working for Sony compared to Virgin?
In Cold Blood, it was fine. Yeah, they were good. Yeah, I mean, they didn't care about money particularly either. They wanted it finished on time, and of course it wasn't. But apart from that, it was perfectly okay working for them. They were riding high because PlayStation had gone from nothing to extreme success in a very short period of time. So they were pretty upbeat people to be around at the time. Yeah, we liked Sony.
Then after In Cold Blood, you went on to do a big license game that doesn't tend to get as much recognition, the Road to El Dorado.
Yeah, that was just that was kind of that was meant to come like after In Cold Blood, using the same engine, just to kind of buy us 6 months while we figured out what we would do after In Cold Blood. But of course, In Cold Blood overran, so El Dorado and In Cold Blood sort of overlapped at the end, just to make things supremely complicated and difficult. So our scheduling planning didn't quite do us any favors, but it was the same software, same engine, so that the In Cold Blood team slowly transitioned over to El Dorado. But you wouldn't know it was the same engine, because the games are very different.
I didn't know it was the same engine. So working for a licensed game, was that different? Well, obviously it was different, but like, how different was it to working on your own IPs?
But it's always easier because you don't have to invent things. So you've got some gameplay to make, but that's all. You got the characters and you got the world, so it makes it hugely more simple. But it was just work for hire. It was just it wasn't a big thing for us. It was just some work we took on.
Then I think the next thing that you did was the Game Boy port for Broken Sword, which is quite an important one to talk about, given what it was later used for. But what was your experience like working on a Game Boy port of such a big, expansive game?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this recently, and we can't believe we actually did it, because it was an 8 megabyte cartridge, and the game originally came out on two CD-ROMs. So how could it possibly fit on a cartridge? We were slightly crazy to try it, to be honest. I mean, looking at it now, it's a miracle it actually ever was done. I mean, I did it, but I'm scratching my head going, how do we do that? It was some sort of miracle to fit it in. And as you rightly know, it was cut down quite a lot in order to fit it on the cartridge, but it did fit. And the other thing was we invented a pretty interesting UI for it, and that's what we should have. That UI, we should have done that for the PlayStation games we'd done earlier, because we really cracked it. How can you play an adventure game with a gamepad? Well, we kind of showed exactly how. I think that's one of the great successes of GBA Sword, as well as actually fitting it on a cartridge. The fact that we figured out the UI.
The fact that it's not just the fact that the game originally came out on 2 discs, but it had to be installed as well, and it had everything had to be extracted, and Broken Sword was a massive game, and then you had the whole thing on a tiny little chip.
Yeah.
I know you cut out a lot, and the dialogue was all text and stuff like that, but it's still an incredible achievement to get that game working on a Game Boy.
Well, probably 90%. To be fair, 90% of those CD-ROMs would be music and speech samples. So you take those things out of the equation that you've already saved quite a lot. Then you kind of write it from a different perspective, whereby you're trying to squeeze it very hard. I mean, the other thing to remember is that quite a few of us came from the 8-bit days of the 80s. So we were used to writing a game for 48K or something like that. I mean, a Spectrum game is 48K, kilobytes, not megabytes, kilobytes, and you're looking at every single byte to see if it's been efficiently used. So it's all when you write a Spectrum game, everything you're doing is about saving memory. So we just dug back into those skills and said, right, we're back where we were. Every byte counts. Now let's re-implement Broken Sword. Because you can be when you don't have memory constraints, you can be very, very lazy about it. You just write an enormous game, and there's nothing stopping you from doing it. But when you need to, you can actually make a lot of what you've got.
And that shows just how. I mean, to do that, you'd have to be a really good programmer. Because I mean, a lot of programmers nowadays, there's any dead code, it just gets left in. I'm sure you know that, don't you?
Yeah.
But with like converting a game from being that big to that small, you've got to be, I would say, ruthless.
It was ruthless, and nothing was left. Nothing was left to chance. You looked at every single sprite, every single sound effect, every single line of dialogue. It all had a cost to it. But as much as anything, it's the mindset.
So obviously, I mean, we're going to skip over Broken Sword 3 for now. The Game Boy port ended up getting reused for the director's cut.
It did form the basis of that game, yeah.
This might be a daft question, but why did you not use the PC version of it to make the director's cut?
Well, the thing about the director's cut was there's two important things. The first thing is that the lead version was Nintendo DS,
right?
Cartridge. So it wasn't like a free for all. Suddenly, it was a DS. So it was a Nintendo handheld. One generation later. So we didn't go from GBA sword to a DVD. We went to a slightly better cartridge. So it was still a tight. It was still not go crazy, do whatever you want. And that DS was the most important version. I mean, there was a Wii version as well, but that deal with Ubisoft was for they wanted an up-to-date Nintendo game that was jazzed up a bit from the original. So we had the space to put some new stuff at the beginning, and then we realized whatever space was left, we would try and bring stuff back from the original PC game and put as much of it as we could back into the game. But there still wasn't infinite space, so we did what we could with the time and the memory. But it didn't take it back to the original game. And the other thing about it was that we at the time we weren't sure that we had all the tools and data to actually rebuild the original game. We never expected to be making versions of it again in the future, so we didn't do a very good job of archiving it, and we weren't sure that we could get the thing back into the state where it could be rebuilt, and if we had been able to do that, the job would have been taking things out to fit it onto the DS cartridge. Whereas what we actually ended up doing was putting things in to the GBA game to the space allowed. So it was either cut back the original again for the DS game, or add to the GBA game for the DS game. It all amounted to roughly the same thing.
So was the Wii port and the PC version of the director's cut based on the DS version? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean the Wii version and the DS version were done in parallel. They are effectively the same game, but the Wii was seen as a lesser of lesser importance. And, the Wii may have had more memory, but it couldn't be used really because the DS was the constraint.
So after the Game Boy version of Broken Sword, you went on to do Broken Sword 3, and this had new engine, new graphical style, new everything. What was that like?
Well, I mean, it was just what we had to do. I mean, I wasn't ever particularly enamored with the 3D, but it was made clear to us that it was only going to happen if it was 3D and very much console-y with a gamepad and direct control and all these things that you had to have to get that kind of deal. So I mean, it was the only thing going, so it's what we had to do. I mean, publishers, they were interested in the Broken Sword name, but they didn't kind of want another of the 2D things. And the other thing about the 2D is it was extremely expensive to develop. So if you're talking about a big console game with much higher res 2D graphics and all the rest of it, it wasn't quite clear how you could do that for any kind of reasonable expense. And the thing about a 3D game is you get your character model and you can run it around each part of the game, and it's cheap to animate because it's just the same model. You just move the arms around, and there's cost advantages to. In theory, there are cost advantages to doing a 3D game. Now, what happens is 3D games is that they are generally more complicated and more difficult to polish. So what you gain in one place, you lose in another, which is why a lot of 3D games are kind of running around in a big empty world because it's difficult to do anything else.
Did you enjoy working on Broken Sword 3 with it being so different?
It was okay. I mean, I missed most of it because I was on the GBA Sword. The two actually overlapped. So there were two teams at Revolution. I was GBA Sword, and then GBA Sword 2. So I came into Broken Sword 3 kind of 2/3 of the way through that project, and I did a few things like what did I do? I think I did a load of Nico stuff and things like that, bits and bobs here and there. But it wasn't my game and it wasn't my engine, so I just kind of joined the team and did what I was told. It was heavily compromised by budget. I mean, that's the main problem with that game. There wasn't enough money to do what they wanted, so we were reusing elements of it to make the game big enough in the time we had, which is where the great puzzles come from. For example, it was here's a mechanism you can reuse a few times, and it's just cheap content.
Are you referring to the crates?
I am referring to the crates. Yeah. Before you bring it up, Graham, I thought I'd just get it in there and get the matter.
I wasn't going to, but
get it out in the open, get it over with.
I mean, to be fair, I didn't think the crates were that bad. I thought it was it made it
okay.
more Tomb Raider-y, but it was still fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it was different, but it was fun.
Yeah, there were probably just too many of them relative to everything else, but I think they were quite. What we did was okay.
Yeah. I think at the start of the game with the airplane, and you've got to balance it so you can escape. I thought that was really, really clever. I'm guessing you weren't involved in that bit though.
I think I didn't do it initially. I think I was back on it. I think I fixed some things on it later on. I mean, I remember being in that code and doing some stuff. I mean, it wasn't mine, but at one point I was there working on it.
Yeah,
it's a long time ago. Yeah, what did I do? I can't remember. I think I did some UI stuff on it. That something was broken, and I got moved back onto it to fix it.
Fair enough. So after Broken Sword 3, Broken Sword 4 came out. As I understand it, you weren't involved in Broken Sword 4 all that much at all. Is that right?
No. Not much, no.
Nothing at all. No.
Well, some design.
Fair enough. Have you played Broken Sword 4?
No.
Fair enough. After Broken Sword 4, you worked on what we've already discussed, which was the director's cut and remastered version of Broken Sword 1 and 2, respectively.
Yeah.
And you were a lot more involved in those.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because effectively we started again because you know we'd really hit hard times and we wasn't certain what we were going to do or if we would do anything again. So you know we were almost down to nothing at the point where the director's cut came to being, and then after that we were also again like not much going, you know, and then the iPhone came out and we got another phone call from Apple saying we'd love to see Broken Sword on an iPhone. That's when we got a second breath of life, you know. And that worked well for us.
How was the interface and the programming side of it? Was it different working for Apple than it was, say, for Virgin or Nintendo?
Yeah, well, it was because they weren't a normal publisher. You know, they were more of a platform. So you know, they had a store and they said, "Here's our store, and put write your game, and we'll give you a big royalty." But they were not funding anything up front. You know, they weren't saying, "Here's $1 million to write a game." They were like, "Write your game, then we'll put it on the App Store, and you'll sell a ton." You know, that was the basic gist of it, and everyone was slightly mind blown by it because we'd never seen anything like it before. You know, no developers had. So the obvious thing to do was to get the old games and try them out, you know, and see how they would work, which is what we did.
So you were a lot more.
Steel Sky, yeah, we thought Steel Sky was the best one to do because it was smaller and it was the screen was exactly the right, you know, the graphics were exactly the right size to fit really nicely on the iPhone. So it seemed like the logical thing to start with.
And then after the iPhone remaster and then the Android ones as well, you went on to do Broken Sword 5, which was the Kickstarter one. Yeah.
2011, 2012 then.
I think it launched in 2013 and the Kickstarter campaign was 2012, I think.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. 10 years ago.
That's scary, isn't it?
Can you believe it?
So as I understand it, the bulk of the game was actually already, I wouldn't say done, but near enough done before you actually went into the Kickstarter. Is that right?
That's not right. No, we had that gallery screen. That was about it.
All right.
Yeah, it was very early. I mean, we'd done a lot of work. We'd done, I don't know, Kickstarter was late summer, wasn't it? So, I mean, we'd been working on it all year, but, you know, there was a lot of work to do. You know, we had to figure out how we were going to do the graphics and how we were going to draw George, and, you know, there was a ton of stuff to work out. So, I mean, build a team and all the rest of it. So we'd done nearly a year's work before that Kickstarter.
So it was all like design work and preliminary work that you'd done up to that point.
Yeah, well, high level design. I mean, the low level design came not far ahead of the actual stitching it all together, you know. So, but there was a broad idea for what the overall game would be, and then there was like very precise design for the initial bit, and not all that much beyond then. I mean, it was a very big and complicated project, so you know, and it wasn't clear what was going to work and what wouldn't, because obviously what people wanted to see was a traditional Broken Sword 1 style game, but in 4K. So you know, there was you know, what compromises do we have to make to be able to do that, you know. So we did a lot of research and playing about and stuff. So, you know, there was a lot already in it. A lot of work had been done before that Kickstarter, but there wasn't necessarily most of a game, you know.
Right. What made you and the rest of Revolution decide to go through Kickstarter rather than a traditional publisher?
Well, we were unsure how to do it. I mean, we'd had I mean, the history of Revolution was of having problems with publishers right up until that point, you know. So we were kind of open to the idea of doing it a different way, and crowdfunding was just starting to become a thing. And I've looked back and remembered, you know, numerous meetings that kept occurring where we looked at different ways of crowdfunding it, you know, maybe doing it ourselves or doing it this way or doing it that way, or kind of selling shares in the game like a theatre production. And, you know, there's different ways to look at it. And maybe we would get it so far. Essentially what we funded it with our own sort of iPhone type money for a long while. And then, you know, the really interesting thing that happened was the Double Fine Kickstarter, which kind of changed a lot of things for everybody, really, because it was so successful. You know, it took crowdfunding from being kind of a niche edge type thing that wasn't quite working into this enormous new concept that seemed very promising, because it freed people from the tyranny of working for publishers, you know. So we were pretty excited by that, and we also realized that at some point there'd be a backlash, and it would start to go wrong as games failed to deliver. So, you know, we felt there was actually a very tight period of time where a Kickstarter would work, and we pretty much nailed it dead on, you know, because after our Kickstarter finished, and in fact we were racing to get it done and finished before the Double Fine game missed its publication deadline, because we knew that would spell trouble for crowdfunding. So, you know, we were in a race to be out and done before that happened, and we were right, you know, because that game didn't release when it was supposed to release, and there was a backlash. So I think if we'd been a month or two later with Broken Sword 5's Kickstarter, we might not have been anything near as successful with it.
I might be misremembering this, but if I remember correctly, there was a bit of backlash for Broken Sword 5 when it was a few hours late on Steam. You know, so I can only imagine how bad it would be if it was months, you know. Fans are, I suppose when people are paying that much money for what is essentially a pre-order, I can see why people would get, you know, that way inclined about, you know, making complaints and
well, there's, you know, if you get tens of thousands of people or whatever it was all in one place, then some of them are going to really complain about something, and those are the ones you hear, you know. So you only need 20 people of 20,000 to be absolutely furious about something to actually create an impression of that's all that's going on, you know. I mean, most people aren't that bothered. They're quite happy to sit and wait to get the game when it comes out, you know. And that was the case with Broken Sword. I mean, we never had too many people complaining, but there was always someone, you know. But if you really screw it up and don't communicate to people what's happening, and then you just let it lapse past a deadline or something, then there's going to be a backlash. But I mean, the other thing about crowdfunding for games is that, of course, normally these kind of things happen behind closed doors. You know, that it's a publisher issue if your game is going wrong or going too slowly or needs more money. You know, it's all happening behind closed doors. No one sees it. But when it's crowdfunding, all of that's laid wide and open, and everyone sees it. You know, and it's not always very pretty. You know.
How did you cope, like on a personal level, with the criticism that you got? I mean, because I know there wasn't a lot, but it was quite vocal what there was. How did you cope with it?
I didn't think it was that bad. You talk to people, basically. I mean, we had a very close relationship with all of the fan base, and you know, we knew the goats who were the central core of the fan base, and we knew them very well, and they communicated to us and us to them. So we got a pretty good handle on the overall picture of where people were, and, you know, and we always communicated. We always had our game jam things, and you know, we didn't disappear and keep things secret. We were always very, very open about the problems and stuff. So I mean, I don't really remember it as ever been too difficult in that respect. I mean, yeah, there's a few people complaining, but there always is, you know. I mean, people are complaining anyway. If you do all of the other games, you always get an email saying this is the worst game ever, you know, or whatever. There's always someone complaining about something, but you also look at it and say, well, there's one person threatening to kill us with an email, but there's also 100 people saying we love your game. So, you know, it balances, doesn't
it? So speaking specifically about crowdfunding and Kickstarter, you must have had a fairly positive experience from the whole thing, I'm guessing, because of what you're about to do.
Well, it's taken me 10 years to recover. I mean, the thing about Kickstarter is, and certainly the Broken Sword one, it was extremely intense. You know, that month when we ran that campaign, it was like no sleep for a month. You know, it was really very, very hands on. And it was a successful one. You know, so it could have been worse. But yeah, I enjoyed it, but it was mega hard work. But yeah, I am about to step up and do another one, but hopefully it won't be quite as wild as that one was.
Before we move on to that one, I do recall, I think, I could be wrong, I think Broken Sword 5 was one of the first Kickstarter campaigns to fully embrace the concept of the stretch goal.
Is that right?
I don't know. I think it was the first one I remember. You know, and there was the Order of the Goat thing where everyone pledged an extra, was it $6.66? You know, to try and just up it a little bit, and it was, you know, like the fan base like really sort of pulled in together and knuckled down, and you know, it was a great month to be a fan. You know, it was, you know, I mean, it must have been difficult, you know, being one of the Rev guys, but you know, from my perspective, it was like, you know, you felt like you were, you know, like we were talking on the Rev forum and stuff at the time, and you know, everyone was interacting with each other, and it was a wonderful experience.
It was a good experience, but I mean, the month was very tiring because we were always doing update stuff. You know, we were trying to write the game, and there was nearly always a film crew in the office as well. You know, following us around and stuff. I mean, it was just crazy. So,
speaking of the film crew, for, as I understand it, for as long as you've been working at Rev and in between and doing other bits and pieces in between, you've always documented what you've done.
I kept it like, you know, like I got to do. Everyone's got a to-do list. Well, I just map it onto a done list. Everything I've done, I write it down. You know, did this sprite. You know, did this puzzle and had this meeting or whatever. So I kept those going right back into the, I don't know, 2007 or something like that.
So your next project, which will be launching on Kickstarter very soon, I believe it's ready, is it not?
It is ready. It's done. Yeah, it's basically a book about the history of Revolution. What we just discussed, but in book form. I do have a copy. I just happen to have one. Here it is. You can see that, and it's incredible. Very thick.
I said to you that I do like thick books.
It is heavy. Actually, it's like a brick.
You could kill a man with that book.
You could. You could have a big accident if you dropped one.
So, what made you decide you wanted to write a book?
I mean, because people keep asking me these questions, it suggests that people are interested in the answers, because it's such a long time ago now, a lot of it. And, you know, we wrote a couple of games, especially Broken Sword and Steel Sky and stuff, that are considered to be seminal games, and the popularity of those games it seems to be getting more and more, to be honest. If you look on the Facebook Broken Sword group, I mean, I'm sure there's more people in there talking about Broken Sword now than there were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So it's kind of getting more popular. And also that, you know, a lot of it goes back so far that people have been born since. They've no idea what's going on with, you know, what's called retro gaming and 8-bit machines and all that stuff. And it wasn't all filmed on iPhones back in those days, because there weren't those kind of things around, So all we've got in many cases when we're talking about the development of something like Steel Sky is people's memories, and it's like 30 years ago. So either we're going to forget it, or we need to write it down before it's too late. We're none of us that old, but we're not that young either. So if I go to the shops and I forgot what I went out for, So with that in mind, I really ought to write down what I remember from a meeting in 1993, before I forget it. So that's I just thought it was a valuable thing to do at this point, and I kind of see myself as a like a midpoint. I like writing games, and I think I'll be doing it for decades to come. So this looks like a good midpoint to take a break, remember what we've done so far, what we did right and what we did wrong, document it, set it down, and then draw a line and move on to what we do next. Seemed like the right time.
So, speaking about the book, then it's all finished. That the book that you've got isn't a model; it's a real book. It's all written. It's
look,
ready to go.
It's got text and pages and photographs and everything. It's real.
Nice. So, when can we expect the Kickstarter campaign to launch for it?
It's a good question. It could be real soon, actually. I mean, all I've got to do is stitch together a load of footage for the video thing, which is going to be the strangest ever made Kickstarter video. I mean, I don't do things in a corporate way or a normal way. I'll do it in a very left field way. So it's going to be a strange video, but so what? I don't really care. I mean, to be different is good, isn't it? It should be fun, slightly tongue in cheek. But I'm just about to stitch that together. So maybe that'll be done by the end of the week. It's supposed to be done by the end of the week. Figure out postage. Postage is a nightmare.
I can imagine, yeah.
It is a nightmare because of things like Brexit, which make it so much harder to sell things into Europe now. I mean, the thing about Broken Sword is it was a German success as much as an English success, and France as well, and then Italy and Spain too, and everywhere else in Europe and North America and places. So, I would foresee selling a reasonable number of books to people not in the UK. So, sending those books is a proper pain now. So I need to figure all that out.
It's got to be stated that the German fans have to be some of the biggest fans in the world. I mean, to the point where Broken Sword 2.5 was created by a bunch of German fans.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would imagine a lot of your core fan base are going to be probably European.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it'll mirror Broken Sword itself. I imagine the sales. So, I mean, it was probably 50% German, as you would expect. I mean, if you remember that Kickstarter, the Tim Schafer Double Fine Kickstarter video, I mean, he very amusingly alluded to the fact that Germany was the place where adventure games were still a big thing. So yeah, Germany. But Germany just happens to be one of the hardest places to send books to now, or anything, because there's all sorts of local tax things you have to get right before you send something. So it's basically a nightmare, and you have to learn about it. It's one thing to write a book; it's another thing to put it in the post.
Mm. So, have you got any interesting anecdotes for us from the book, or do we have to wait and read it?
Read the book. Well, I mean, we've talked in a very high level way about numerous games today, but there was a lot of detail in between. There was actually a lot more game projects that were started or nearly started or went wrong, or and a lot of details in the development of those games, the things we went through, and part of the story is dealing with corporate actors working against us. Always there was contractual things happening designed to screw the developer. I mean, it's a very shark infested cesspool, the world of business, I suppose, but also the world of video games in particular. Very difficult place to operate, and so some of that I talk about, and as well as the great stuff, which is the actual making of the games and the finishing them and seeing people play them and all that side. It's like the games industry. It's two sides. There's the game and there's the fans and all the great things, and then there's the deep dark waters of the business world that underlie the whole thing. So you get all of that.
Make it sound very interesting.
Well, most of writing games is people wearing headphones with baseball caps on, avoiding eye contact. That's probably 99% of it. But there's if you got 30 years worth of it, there's enough other interesting stuff going on around the actual process of typing that makes it interesting, hopefully.
It looks like there's a lot of stuff in there. It's a big book. The font's not massive. It looks like it's going to be quite an interesting read.
Yeah, it's about, if it was just a book, it would be kind of 340 pages, a normal sized page, So it's a normal sized book, but I wanted to put a lot of archive photos in there as well. So that's almost double the size of the thing. But, self-publishing it allows me to do that. I think if I went to the publisher and said I want to put in, another 200 pages of photos, they'd say, not a good idea. How about 10 pages in the middle? When you get a book and there's like in the middle there's 5 glossy pages of photos.
Yeah, I'm looking at my shelf now. There's some behind my computer. There's a couple that I know they've got the. It's like the map pages, and then there's like 10 glossy pages of photos, and then the rest of it's
10 shiny ones in the middle, and the first 5 pages are black and white, and really old ones, and then it's like then it's color ones of more recent things. I didn't want to do that, and it's not a the gist of the book is about corporate forces destroying good things. So I didn't want to deal with any of that. So I've written the book I wanted to write, and I've put in it the photos that I wanted to put in it, and as a consequence, it is indeed extremely expensive to print the thing. But that is the price of having the thing as good as it can be. Hopefully people will see that it's worth it. I think it is. I think it's a good representation of things that happened, and I think the pictures make it much better. So I've just done what I wanted to do, made the book I wanted to read, so there it is. You'll see it soon.
And I believe it's got a foreword by Charles Cecil.
It has got a foreword by Charles, yeah. He's actually read it and fact checked it, and told me to change some things or add some other things that he remembered, because everybody remembers things different. I can remember a meeting that we all went to in London in 1992, and we discussed this, that, and the other with the publisher. Charles can't remember that meeting at all, but remembers something that I don't remember. So, for him to read it, for me, felt quite important, and it took a lot of doing to get him to actually read it. But he has read it, and as has Noreen and various other people, to be honest. And it's not an official book. It's not the book that Charles would have written. It's the book that I've written. So it's from my perspective. But and it's not. I've got to state, it's not an official Revolution book at all. But yeah.
Sorry, what company?
The guys. That's a pretty cat.
She's very pretty, but she's also very annoying. No. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, all the Rev guys have read it and or got copies, and will hopefully read it soon. So yeah, that's what it is.
And when you are listing it on Kickstarter and you full flow with your campaign, I take it there'll be signed copies that you're going to be selling as well.
Yeah, I guess the top tier will be signed. And I'll put people's names in the book that have gone for that level. I guess would be the good thing to do, because it's it's all about the people that buy these things, isn't it, and read them or play them. It's all about the fans.
Right. Thank you very much for your time. We'll look forward to the Kickstarter campaign when it launches. We'll when it does launch, we'll put the links in the description and that ready for it.
All right. Sounds cool.
Right. Thank you very much, Tony. It's been brilliant.